All right, guys, so jumping back in here. Now, if you already watched the first video lecture, I realized that after I got some emails about some quizzes, and I was like, wait, uh, what's going on here? And I went back and I realized that I actually had made a mistake on that video lecture. I think I was too worried about the different types of gloves that I would put on to give you a little bit more entertainment value, that as I was switching gloves, I went about the wrong way. And I'll show you what I did here in a second, but if you're just joining me, then no, I did not make a mistake, and this is the true video lecture. All right, so welcome. All right, so here's your packet. This is the front, and we're basically just going to walk right through this. All right, so this talks about the short run. We've already done these short runs, right? But we're moving then into the long run. I'm going to show you how everything adjusts. All right, so make sure you have this packet. When you flip over, what you're basically doing here is just fill out these graphs with me, right? And this is from this is that front, right? I'm going to use a different piece of paper here. So let me walk you through this now. So we have a short run, and the scenario here is that we increase the money supply by 10%, right? So we got M1, R1, right? And we know from this money market that that the Fed's increasing the money supply, and what that would look like, right, is that, right? So we increase our money supply, we go to M2, right? We draw our new equilibrium, and we see that interest rates have decreased, right? So what does that decrease in interest rates do? Well, we remember that when interest rates go down, right, investment spending goes up. So if I kind of switch right back down over to my last graph on the end here, right, we were at long run equilibrium of PL1 and Y1, right? That increase in investment is an aggregate demand shift to the right, an increase in aggregate demand. And we're now at Y2 and PL2, okay? So that's that first part. Now, where the loanable funds comes in is, remember that on Friday we talked about what are the shifters of the loanable funds market? Well, one of them is income, right? If you have more income, which is what we did here, because there's higher investment from the lower interest rates, that our GDP increases, income increases from Y1 to Y2. When we have higher income, we have higher savings, right? And I switch these there too, right? So with more income, we save more. And just to make sure that I get this right here, R2, and our supply of loanable funds will increase. Now, the reason I drew it all the way down there, right, is because these interest rates from the money market and the loanable funds market are exactly the same. All right, R1 is equal to R1, R2 is equal to R2. All right, so even though they're different in the sense that one's nominal, one's real, they are equal to each other, right? So a decrease in nominal interest rates, that is the same as that decrease in real interest rates, right? This increase in supply of loanable funds coming from the shift in aggregate demand, that increase in income, meaning more supply of loanable funds, all right? Now, if you watched the first lecture, what I did wrong was I went back to this way, right? And I kind of started back on this money market. These two graphs are still going to look the same, but as I was switching gloves, right, I should have been paying attention to what I was doing. So let's go like this way, right? So if we have this now, we have an inflationary gap, right? And this inflationary gap was because we have an increase in the money supply, which drove down interest rates, right, which increases aggregate demand. Now, what was our long run adjustment to an inflationary gap, right? What I did in that first one is I started with the money market, and I kind of was using interest rates, but we're only shifting aggregate demand if, like, the Fed or the government is doing something here. And this is just a long run adjustment, all right? So if I were to draw this out right now, what we have is this case, right? This would be our PL2, this would be our Y2, right? So this graph is now where we're at here, right? We have an inflationary gap, right? And what did we say in an inflationary gap? How this economy, if the Fed or if the government doesn't get involved in this, right? Well, in the long run, we adjust to wages, right? Workers can renegotiate their contracts, and they'll renegotiate for a higher wage because, well, price levels have increased, right? That higher wage leads to a decrease in your supply of, or your short run aggregate supply curve, right? And that increases our price level to PL3. So if you watched that first lecture, you saw me go like this, right? This MV equals PQ, and I said, right, this is the money supply, this is the velocity of money, this is the price level, and this is the quantity or the output, right? And we can cross these two out. We'll talk about which this on Monday, the this equation and everything that goes into it, like what's velocity and what quantity, all that is in general. But for right now, what this is showing, and this is that increase in money supply, we increased that by 10%. When all is said and done, this price level 3, right, because, all right, we're in an inflationary gap, people adjust to higher prices and ask for higher wages. Higher wages leads to a decrease in the short run supply curve, and that leads to a higher price level. That higher price level is also equal to 10%, right? So an increase in the money supply just leads to an increase in the price level of 10%. We are no better off in the long run. We're still at the same output level. All we've done, or all the Fed has really done in the end, by increasing money supply, is they've just increased the inflation, that price level. All right. So now we can work backwards. All right. So this is the long term or long run adjustment, right, to this inflationary gap. Right. Now let's go back here. So we have a decrease in income, right? Y2 to YF. That means that, and this would be R2, and this would be LF2, right? If we're thinking about our graphs up here, right? Where we're starting here is where we ended with this shift, right? So, but a decrease in income leads to a decrease in the supply of loanable funds. Right? And what ends up happening is that we actually end up just going back from R2 back to R1. Or to put it back, in this case, we went R2, and now this shift back of decrease of supply of loanable funds is actually just a going back from R2 back to R1, right? That's what we're showing here. So the bottom line is that interest rates in the long run, are the same as where we started, we started, okay? Right, and that shifts because we have less income. Now, the other part of this is, well, prices are higher, right? That price level has increased to PL3, right? So this was, and we know that a higher price level means that you need to hold more money in your pocket, right? Physical cash, because your goods cost more, right? So that is an increase in money demand curve, right? And that is also equivalent to that R2 going back to R1, right? So this money supply curve is now this M2, right? Because the Fed did increase the money supply, but interest rates in the long run just go back from R2 to R1. All right, so in that first video lecture, I kind of went, right? I went here, and then I came back to this, right? And that's when I was kind of fixing my glove and wasn't paying attention, right? This is your long run adjustment. Right, just like we talked about with the macro model and how this adjusts in the long run, right? It's not aggregate demand that's adjusting, it's the short run aggregate supply curve because of that inflation, right? That inflationary gap leads to higher wages leads to that decrease in the short run aggregate supply. When all is said and done, this initial money supply increase only just leads to an increase in price level of the same amount. All right, so there's your graphs. Right, so we go increase in the money supply, which lowers interest rates, which leads to an increase in aggregate demand, which leads to what's going on up there? Which leads to a increase in income. That increase in income leads to an increase in the supply of loanable funds. People have more money to put in the bank, and that's what that supply is all about. Now, this inflationary gap, in the long run, workers adjust. They ask for higher wages because prices are more, right? Decrease of short run supply curve leads to a higher price level. Less income, less supply of loanable funds, higher price level, higher money demand, right? R2, R1, these interest rates start at R1, go to R2, and just end up going back to R1, right? So if we flip that, go to your next page, right? We do the exact opposite here. So now we have a decrease in the money supply, all right? So follow along with me here, all right? So we start at R1 and M1, we decrease that money supply, right? And that increases interest rates from R1 to R2, right? And this is M2. Higher interest rates, when interest rates go up, investment goes down, right? So flip back down to here. We were at long run equilibrium. This was YF or Y1 and PL1, right? Higher interest rates, less investment. So we shift our aggregate demand curve to the left. Now we are at PL2 and Y2, right? Loss of income or loss of GDP means less supply of loanable funds, right? Less people putting, or less money in the bank, really, when it comes down to it, because people have less income, right? And that is R2, loanable funds, too. Where I started. Once again, these interest rates are the same, right? The nominal R1, R2 is equal to the real R1, R2. Those are at the same level, right? So that's your short run. What happens? Decreased money supply drives up interest rates, which drives down investment or business investment, lower income, lower or less supply of loanable funds. All right, now we're here, right? And this is our long run adjustment. So this would be that Y2, this would be that PL2, right? And then this is our long run iron supply curve, and this is YF, right? Once again, money times velocity equals price times output. We won't worry about these for right now. All right, what we should realize is that a decrease in the money supply by 5% just equals a decrease in the price level by 5%. So how does that occur? Well, when we're in a recession, right, we're not shifting aggregate demand because the Fed already did their part. They decreased the money supply. We're not talking about government getting involved, right? How do we adjust the short run or this to go back to long? Well, in a recession, price levels are lower, right? People will try to find a job for, they're out of work or whatever. So they're just looking for a job. Those jobs come at lower wages. So in a recession, workers take less wages, lower wages, which means we can increase that supply. Right. And we drop down to PL3, right? And that's that lower price level, right? But that PL3 then drives up our income, or that shift of short run our supply curve. We now go from Y2 back to YF, right? No more just the same amount of output in the long run, right? We started at YF, we're always back at YF. But that shift is an increase in GDP, an increase in income, right? Which means that we have an increase in the supply of loanable funds. And this graph just goes back to where it was originally, right? So we're back down, so we drop down to R1. Right, so we went R1 to R2, and then in the long run, we just go right back to R1, right? Lower price level, lower money demand. This is M2, this is R2. Okay. Prices are lower, so you don't need to hold as much in your pocket. So money demand decreases. We're back down to R1. Okay. So interest rates in the long run just go up, and then they come right back down to where they started, right? And in the end, once again, a decrease in the money supply by 5% The only real impact it has, it doesn't change interest rates. All it does is it changes price level by that equal amount, just like we did here. An increase in the money supply by 10% as we run through all of it doesn't do anything to interest rates. Interest rates just go back to where they started. All it does is it changes the price level by that exact same amount. All right. So if this is your the first time you watched this, once again, I didn't make any mistakes on the first one. If you watched the first one, give this one a look. The only thing that really changes is this graph right here. Right, I went the opposite way as what I wanted to. Right, and that will change a little bit for those questions. All right. Any questions you have, let me know. Otherwise, see you tomorrow. Have a good weekend.